The first sign the world was ending wasn't the sirens. It wasn't the screaming headlines or the videos looping endlessly on every screen, pixelated horrors of deep space telescopes capturing a jagged, mountain-sized god of rock named Apollyon. It wasn't even the way the sky had taken on a bruised, copper-colored haze that made the sun look like a cataract in a dying eye. It was my father standing in the kitchen at 4 a.m, still in his work boots, holding his phone like it was a weapon he didn't know how to fire. "Ezra," he said. I woke to the sound of my name spoken the way soldiers speak it. Low, urgent, already bracing for the impact of a mortar shell. It wasn't the "Ezra, you're late for school" voice. This was the voice of a tactical retreat. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air in the room felt different, electric and heavy, like the breathless moments before a Louisiana supercell rips the roof off a barn. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, thick and cloying, the kind that made the peach fuzz on my arm stand straight up. From my bedroom door, I could see the kitchen light spilling into the hall, a harsh, flickering fluorescent yellow that threw his shadow long and distorted against the peeling wallpaper. Kane Mercer, my father, my only anchor in a world of shifting tides, looked like he had been carved out of that shadow. He was 37, but in that light, with the blue glow of the phone reflecting in his pupils, he looked ancient. "Dad," he swallowed. I heard the click in his throat. A grown man, a man who had survived 3 tours in the desert and the slow-motion car crash of my mother's death, was swallowing fear. "They confirmed it," he said. "The trajectory. The math. All of it." I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The hardwood floor was ice cold, biting into my soles, grounding me in a reality I suddenly desperately wanted to escape. "What do you mean, confirmed?" He finally looked at me then. His eyes were bloodshot, the dark circles beneath them looking like charcoal smudges. There was something old and broken in his gaze, a surrender I'd never seen before. It made my stomach drop into a bottomless pit. "It's real," he said, his voice a ghost of itself. "It's coming. And it's not missing us." By sunrise, the world hadn't just broken. It had begun to liquefy. The internet was a digital graveyard of goodbyes, and, God help us, every phone in the parish buzzed in a discordant symphony of emergency alert system blares, that rhythmic, soul-piercing screech that usually meant a flash flood or a missing child. Now, it just meant the end of the story. News anchors, men and women who were paid to be the calmest people in the room, were failing. I watched a woman on Channel 4 touch her earpiece, listen for a second, and then simply walk off camera, leaving an empty desk and a scrolling ticker that read, "Impact window, 72 to 96 hours. I walked out onto our front porch. The Louisiana humidity was usually a warm blanket. Today, it felt like a wet shroud. I was barefoot, the weathered wood of the porch grain pressing into my skin. In the street, the world was a painting of chaos. Our neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was throwing suitcases into the back of a truck he hadn't washed in a decade. His wife was on the lawn, sitting on a lawn chair, laughing hysterically while she brushed the hair of a porcelain doll. The air smelled like damp earth and gasoline, the scent of 1,000 people realizing they had nowhere to go but wanting to get there fast. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked with a frantic, rhythmic persistence. It didn't understand the astrophysics of a meteor, but it knew the scent of human panic. "Ezra!" my father barked from inside. "Pack the heavy gear. If it doesn't keep you warm or keep you fed, it stays." I turned, my mind spinning. "Leaving where, Dad?" "Where do you go when the sky is falling?" "Colorado," he said, emerging from the hallway. He looked like a man preparing for a breach. He had a green canvas duffel bag slung over his shoulder, military issued, faded by the sun of places he never named. His jaw was a hard line of granite. Kane Mercer didn't waste motion. He never had. He was a man of checklists and contingency plans, but this felt different. This felt like a retreat to the last line of defense. "Why Colorado?" I asked, following him into the kitchen. "That's 1,000 miles of chaos away." He stopped near the counter, his hand resting on a stack of canned goods. He hesitated. A flicker of a second, but it was enough for me to notice. "Luke Ashmore," he said. The name felt heavy, like a lead weight dropped into a still pond. "Your army friend? The one you haven't spoken to since the funeral?" He nodded. "He's got a site. A bunker, deep in the bedrock of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains." I stared at him, a laugh bubbling up in my throat that felt more like a sob. "A bunker? Dad, you used to call him a tinfoil hat paranoiac. You said he was losing his mind." "No," Kane said, his voice sharpening like a whetstone. "I said he was obsessed. There's a difference, and right now his obsession is the only thing that might keep your heart beating." "Dad, this isn't a movie. We can't just drive to a secret base." "You're right," he said, stepping close and grabbing my shoulders. His grip was firm, not painful but grounding. It's worse than a movie. In movies, the hero saves the world. In reality, the world is already gone. Now, we just try to survive the funeral. Kane was 37 years old, but his body was a map of a life lived in the red. There was the gray threading his dark hair, appearing like smoke through a forest. There was the jagged scar that bisected his right eyebrow, the result of a piece of shrapnel in a valley near Kandahar. He'd had me when he was 16. A child raising a child. He'd been forced into manhood before he'd even learned how to shave properly. My mother, Sarah, had been his world, a girl with hair like spun honey and a laugh that could clear the humidity out of a room. When she died of a sudden, aggressive meningitis when I was 4, she took the light with her. I remembered the funeral. I remembered Kane standing over the casket, not crying, but looking like he was trying to memorize the molecules of the air so he wouldn't forget her scent. He'd joined the army a month later. He'd left me with my grandmother, gone off to fight shadows, and come back 3 years later with a hollow look in his eyes and a silence that lived in his chest. But he stayed. He didn't run. He didn't drink himself into a grave. He showed up to every mediocre school play. He taught me how to change a tire when I was 12. He sat by my bed every night. I had the fading dream, the one where I saw my mother's face dissolving into white light. Now, as we stood in a kitchen that smelled of stale coffee and impending doom, I saw the boy he used to be. The boy who had held a newborn baby in a cramped trailer and promised the universe he would never let anything touch her. Who is Luke, really? I asked softly. Beyond the bunker, Kane exhaled, a long, weary sound. A planner. The best I ever knew. He left the service early because he saw the writing on the wall. Not just about meteors, Ezra. About the fragility of everything. He used to say the world wouldn't end with fire, but with the arrogance of thinking we were too big to fail. And you believed him? I laughed, my father admitted, his eyes darkening. I told him he was crazy. I told him life was about the here and now. I was wrong. He was right, and I'm not going to let my pride be your death sentence. By noon, the packing was done. It was a pathetic assembly of a life. Photo albums wrapped in plastic. My mother's silver locket. My college acceptance letter from LSU. The one I'd received 2 days ago and hadn't even opened. It felt like a relic from a dead civilization. Kane packed with a cold, mechanical efficiency. He checked the action on his Remington, packed boxes of ammunition, and stacked crates of bottled water in the bed of the truck. Outside, the atmosphere was screaming. Helicopters, black dots against the copper sky, thundered overhead in a constant low-frequency vibration. A man 3 houses down was standing on his roof, firing a shotgun into the air, screaming that the rapture was here. Kane locked the front door of our house. It was a habit, a reflex of a man who still believed in property lines. I paused on the porch, my hand lingering on the railing. I looked at the chipped white paint. I looked at the tire swing Kane had hung from the ancient oak in the yard, the rope now frayed and gray. I looked at the doorframe where he had notched my height every year since I was 5. 5 feet 2 inches. 5 feet 4 inches. 5 feet 6 inches. Ezra, he called from the truck. Don't look back. There's nothing left to see. What if we don't make it, Dad? I asked, my voice small against the roar of a passing jet. What if the road ends before we get there? He walked back to me, his boots crunching on the gravel. He placed a hand on my shoulder, solid, warm, the only thing in the universe that felt real. Then we try anyway, he said. We move forward until we can't. That's the deal. Always forward. We pulled out of the driveway as the radio crackled. A local station was still broadcasting, but the DJ was gone. It was just an automated loop. A Christmas song started playing, the most wonderful time of the year. The cheerful bells and crooning vocals sounding like a mockery, a sick joke played by a dying world. Kane reached out and twisted the knob until the cabin was silent. The drive was a descent into the inferno. What should have been a 14-hour trip turned into a 3-day odyssey of horrors. The interstates were no longer roads. They were linear parking lots. Thousands of cars had simply run out of gas or been abandoned by people who decided to take their chances in the woods. We saw things that will stay behind my eyelids forever. In East Texas, we saw a bus overturned, its passengers sitting in a circle on the asphalt, holding hands and singing hymns while a wildfire encroached on the tree line behind them. In the cities, smoke columns rose like black fingers reaching for the meteor. People fought over gallons of gas with a savagery that stripped away 10,000 years of civilization in 72 hours. Kane drove like a demon. He found back roads, dirt tracks, and farm paths. He didn't sleep. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, occasionally bleeding where he gripped too hard. At night, the sky was no longer copper. It was glowing orange. The atmosphere itself felt like it was being preheated. The stars didn't twinkle. They flickered violently, distorted by the debris trail of the coming fire. Did you ever regret it? I asked him during the second night. We were parked in a cornfield, somewhere near Amarillo, the engine ticking as it cooled. Regret what? He asked, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Having me, being stuck with a kid when you were just a kid yourself. Maybe you could have been something else. Someone else. He turned to me then. The dashboard lights cast deep shadows across his face, but his eyes were clear. Never, not for a single second, Ezra. You weren't a weight. You were the only thing that kept me from floating away after your mom died. You gave me a reason to come home from the sand. What about Mom? I whispered. Do you regret her? He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the wind whistling through the dry stalks of corn. I regret I couldn't save her, he said, his voice breaking for the first time. I spent my whole life training to fight enemies I could see. I didn't know how to fight a fever. I didn't know how to fight God. The meteor, Apollyon, was visible now even in the daylight. A bright, terrifying streak of white fire, growing larger with every heartbeat. It was a countdown clock written in the heavens, and it was counting down to Christmas Day. It was a cruel cosmic punchline, the season of hope ending in the total annihilation of it. By the time we reached the outskirts of Colorado, the world was screaming. The earth had begun to tremble, not massive quakes, but a constant, low-level shiver, as if the planet was bracing for the impact. Kane was limping. He'd tweaked his knee pushing a stalled car out of our way 3 miles back, but he wouldn't admit it. Dad, we need to stop, I said, looking at his pale face. You're shaking. It's the adrenaline, he lied. We're close. Another 50 miles. We need water. And you need something for that leg. There's a pharmacy up ahead. The town was a ghost of itself. Windows smashed, sirens wailing in the distance, but the streets were eerily empty. Most people had already fled to the mountains or given up. We stepped into the half-looted pharmacy. It smelled of spilled cologne and antiseptic. Stay behind me, Kane whispered, his hand hovering over the holster at his hip. I followed him through the aisles. Shelves were toppled. Life-saving medications were scattered like confetti. I was grabbing a bottle of water when the shadow moved. It didn't happen like in the movies. There was no dramatic music. A man, his eyes wide with a chemical-induced mania, lunged from behind a display of greeting cards. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a terrified animal with a rusted hunting knife. Give me the keys, he shrieked. I screamed. Kane moved faster than a man with a bad knee should have been able to. He stepped in front of me, his arm sweeping out to push me back. The blade didn't hit his vest. It found the gap. It sank into his side, just below the ribs. Kane grunted, a sound of pure, concentrated effort. He didn't scream. He drew his pistol and brought the butt of it down on the man's temple with a sickening thud. The attacker slumped to the floor, unconscious or dead. It didn't matter. Dad! I lunged for him. Back to the truck, he wheezed, clutching his side. Blood, dark, hot, and terrifyingly plentiful, began to soak through his flannel shirt. Ezra, move! We escaped. We always did. We scrambled into the truck, and I floored it, the tires screeching as we tore out of the parking lot. That night, the sky finally turned blood red. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains rose ahead of us like jagged teeth against the fire. We were on a service road, miles from any town, when the truck finally gave up, the radiator hissing its final breath. But it didn't matter. We weren't going any further. Kane lay in the back seat, his head propped up against a rolled-up jacket. The blood had stopped flowing, but only because there wasn't much left to pump. His skin was the color of ash. Ezra, he whispered. I'm here, I sobbed. I was kneeling on the floorboards, clutching his hand. It felt so thin, so cold. I'm here, Dad. We're almost there. Luke's place, it's just over that ridge. I can see the coordinates on the map. You listen to me, he said, his eyes glassy, reflecting the red hell of the sky. You go. You take the bag. You take the locket. I'm not leaving you. I shrieked. My voice echoed off the interior of the dead truck. I can't do this without you. You don't have a choice, he said, a ghost of his drill sergeant bark returning. The rock is coming, Ezra. In a few hours, the air is going to burn. You have to be behind that door. Tears streamed down his temples, disappearing into his hair. Luke, he's a hard man, but he's a good one. He'll keep you safe. I don't want safe, I cried, burying my face in his chest. I want you, he smiled. A small, sad, beautiful smile that looked like the Kane Mercer I remembered from before the wars. He reached out with a trembling hand and stroked my hair. I know, he whispered. But you were always the best part of me. If you live, Then I never really die. Kane Mercer died on Christmas Eve, as the first flakes of ash snow began to fall from a sky that had forgotten how to be blue. Christmas Day didn't bring carols. It brought the end of the world. As the sun began to crest over the Pacific on that final morning, Apollyon struck. The impact was a sensory rupture. 1,000 miles away, the ocean flashed into steam, and a shockwave of thermal energy began its race across the globe. Even in the high peaks of Colorado, the ground didn't just shake, it liquefied. The bedrock of the mountains groaned, as the Earth's crust buckled under the kinetic hammer blow. I stood at the heavy steel door of the bunker, my father's blood still drying on my sleeves, looking up one last time. The horizon was a wall of white fire, a sunrise that was going to vaporize everything it touched. The door groaned open. A man stood there, tall, bearded, dressed in tactical gear, his eyes hard and wary. Luke Ashmore. He looked at me, then at the empty road behind me, and he knew. He didn't say he was sorry. There was no time for sorry. He just reached out a hand and pulled me into the dark, just as the sky learned our names for the very last time. The door sealed with the sound of a tomb closing, a finality that seemed to vibrate through the very marrow of my bones. It wasn't a dramatic cinematic clang. There was no explosion of sound to mark the end of the human era. Instead, it was a low, hydraulic hiss, a predatory intake of breath, followed by a deep, bone-deep thud that I felt in my molars. Luke Ashmore's hand was still wrapped around my wrist, his grip like a manacle of warm iron, when the triple locking bolt slid home with a mechanical shriek. The lights overhead flickered, a dying pulse of gold, then stabilized into a steady, sterile, artificial white. And just like that, the world above, the Louisiana humidity, the smell of my father's coffee, the sound of the wind through the pines, ceased to exist. For a heartbeat, the silence was more violent than the impact could have ever been. The bunker entrance chamber was a wide, ribbed throat of reinforced concrete, the air chilled and filtered, smelling of cold oil, static, and the recycled breath of people who had forgotten how to scream. My ears rang with a sudden, deafening pressure. No wind, no sirens, no distant, frantic human noise. Just the low-frequency hum of generators buried miles beneath the Sangre de Cristo bedrock, a mechanical heartbeat for a dead world. Luke released my wrist. The sudden absence of his heat made my skin prickle. I swayed, the adrenaline that had fueled me through the Texas wastelands and the Colorado mountain passes suddenly evaporating, leaving me hollow. My knees didn't just buckle, they dissolved. Strong hands caught me before the concrete could claim me. "Easy," a woman's voice said, sounding as though she were speaking from the end of a long tunnel. I didn't know her name yet, but I remember the terrifying steadiness of her grip, the way she smelled of unscented soap and sharp antiseptic. Someone guided me to a bench bolted to the wall. Someone else pressed a canteen into my shaking hands, the metal biting into my palms. Luke stood a few feet away, already a statue of command. He didn't look at me, not yet. He was already a king, surveying his wreckage. "Seal 2 checked?" he barked, his voice cutting through the fog in my brain. "Green," a voice called back from the shadows of the corridor. "Air scrubbers? Online. Radiation shutters?" A pause. A heavy, pregnant silence that felt like the world holding its breath. Then, engaging now, the lights dimmed to a ghostly amber as massive systems deeper in the mountain roared to life, consuming power like starving beasts. Somewhere far above us, thousands of feet of rock and soil away, the first true wave of atmospheric ignition must have arrived. I imagined the mountain peaks turning to glass. I imagined the truck, and my father inside it, flashing into a silhouette of white light, before being swept away by a wall of fire that moved faster than sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the darkness behind my lids was worse. It was filled with his face. Dad. The name tore through me like a jagged piece of shrapnel, hot and festering. Luke finally turned. Up close, he was a mountain of a man, his presence filling the narrow, sterile space until the air felt thin. He looked older than the few grainy photographs Kane had kept, older than 37. His beard was a thick, dark thicket shot through with premature gray, and his eyes were a sharp, predatory blue that seemed to peel back my skin to see the grief underneath. He noticed the dark, tacky stains on my sleeves immediately. He knew what color life was when it left the body. "Where's Kane?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, the sound of tectonic plates grinding together. I opened my mouth, but my throat was a desert. My vocal cords felt like they had been shredded by the Colorado wind. Nothing came out but a broken, wheezing gasp. The answer was written all over me anyway, in the tremor of my hands, in the way my shoulders curled inward like a dying star. Luke's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He inhaled slowly through his nose, a long, controlled draw of air, then exhaled just as carefully. It was the look of a man defusing a bomb inside his own chest. "I'm sorry, Ezra," he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a performance. It was a precise, surgical acknowledgement of a debt he could never pay back. Something inside me, the last pillar holding up the roof of my sanity, finally snapped. I doubled over, the sound that ripped out of me not quite a scream, not quite a sob. It was an animal sound, raw and primal, a vocalization of the void. Hands reached for me, but I didn't want them. I wanted the cold, the fire, the ash. I wanted to be where he was. The end of the world had waited until I was safe and entombed to finally let me feel the weight of it. Luke didn't move to comfort me. He stood there, rigid, fists clenched so hard at his sides that I could see the white of his knuckles. He watched me come apart with a devastating intensity, like a man who knew better than to step into the path of a collapsing building. There was a gravity between us in that moment, a heavy, distorted attraction born of shared ghosts, and the fact that he was now the only thing left in the universe that knew who I was. I don't remember being moved. The next few hours were a blurred montage of gray concrete and the hum of machines. I remember fragments, a narrow corridor branching into others like the veins of a titan, the sound of heavy, airtight doors sliding shut with a hiss of pressurized air, the distant, muffled thunder of the world being restructured above us. I woke in a small, clean room that smelled of bleach and cold metal. A woman introduced herself as Dr. Hargreave. She checked my pupils with a light that felt like a needle, checked my pulse, listened to the hollow echo in my lungs. "No physical injuries," she said quietly to a shadow standing in the doorway. "Shock. Dehydration. Acute grief." As if grief were a clinical diagnosis that could be cured with a pill and a glass of recycled water. I slept again, a heavy, dreamless state that felt more like a coma than rest. When I finally sat up, the world was still underground. There was no sense of time, no sun, to mark the passing of my old life. The ceiling panels were programmed to mimic the rhythm of a day that no longer existed. My throat felt like I'd swallowed glass. The room was a cell of efficiency. A steel bed frame, gray wool blankets, a desk bolted to the wall. A printed label was taped above the door. Mercer, E. Temporary. The word temporary hollowed me out. Temporary. Until what? Until the air cleared in 100 years? Until I died? I pressed my palm to my chest, half expecting my heart to have finally taken the hint and stopped. Instead, it kept beating. It was a relentless, mocking thud. A knock came at the door, not a hesitant tap, but a firm, authoritative strike. "Ezra?" "Luke." I felt the vibration of his voice in the floorboards. "Yeah," I croaked, my voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. He opened the door but didn't enter. He stood in the threshold, his head nearly touching the doorframe. He was wearing a dark tactical shirt that strained against his shoulders, and the scent of him, smoke, pine, and something metallic, filled the small room, overrunning the bleach. It was an intoxicating, grounding scent. "There's food," he said. "When you're ready." I nodded, staring at my hands. They were clean now. Someone had washed away my father's blood while I slept. I hated them for it. He hesitated, his blue eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "You don't have to eat with everyone else. Not today." "How many?" I asked. 70, he replied. 73, counting you. And the 2 who didn't make it to the gate. 73 souls entombed beneath a mountain, while the rest of humanity was reduced to carbon and memories. "I'll come," I said, standing up. My legs felt like lead, but I didn't want to be alone with the silence anymore. The common area was a cathedral of survival. High ceilings reinforced with massive steel trusses, hydroponic gardens glowing with an eerie, artificial green along the far wall, and long communal tables where people sat in a silence so thick you could taste it. Families huddled together, children staring with wide, vacant eyes, couples holding hands under the tables as if letting go would mean drifting into space. As Luke led me in, 100 eyes shifted toward us. It wasn't curiosity. It was a heavy, mournful reverence. They knew who I was. I was the girl who had arrived at the midnight hour. The girl whose father had bought her entry with his life. I sat at the end of a table, feeling like an intruder in a ghost story. Luke placed a bowl of stew in front of me, thick, hearty, smelling of rosemary and synthetic protein. He set a piece of hard bread beside it, his fingers lingering on the table for a second too long. "If you need anything," he started, then stopped. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, the hard mask of the commander slipped. I saw the guilt there, the jagged, raw edges of a man who had survived while his best friend perished. He looked like he wanted to reach out, to brush a stray hair from my face, but he pulled back, his hand retreating into a fist. "Eat," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You're no use to anyone if you starve." He walked away, and I felt the air go cold in his wake. I watched him move through the room, People didn't just respect him, they orbited him. He was the axis of this small, desperate universe. He spoke to a technician near the water filtration unit, his movements precise and confident. He checked a digital tablet mounted to a pillar, his brow furrowed in a permanent line of calculation. He was the man who had seen the end coming and built a box to survive it. I forced myself to swallow a spoonful of the stew. It tasted like ash. Every bite felt like a betrayal of the man lying in the snow. Days passed, or maybe they were weeks. Time in the bunker was a fluid, cruel thing. There were schedules for everything. Meal rotations, maintenance shifts, mandatory exercise to keep the muscles from wasting in the low-gravity hum of the mountain. Luke ran the place like a battleship. Every system had a backup, every person had a function. He kept me busy. It was a mercy, though I didn't see it that way at first. He had me sorting the medical archives, then inventorying the seed bank, then assisting Dr. Hargreave. He never softened his tone with me. He never gave me the grieving daughter pass. He treated me with a grueling, relentless professionalism that forced me to stay upright. I hated him for the lack of pity, and I was becoming dangerously addicted to the way he looked at me, as an adult survivor, a peer in the wreckage. Late one night, when the lights had dimmed to their nocturnal violet, I found him in the operations room. He was staring at a wall of monitors showing static and the occasional, haunting thermal reading from a dying satellite. The Earth was a sphere of swirling grays and angry oranges. "Did you really believe it would happen?" I asked, my voice echoing in the hollow room. He didn't turn around. He was framed by the glow of a dead planet, his silhouette massive and imposing. I spent 10 years and every cent I had betting that it would. I studied the near-Earth object trajectories while other men were watching football. "But did you want it to?" He turned then. The light caught the sweat on his brow and the hard, beautiful line of his jaw. He stepped toward me, his boots clicking on the metal floor, until he was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "I wanted to be wrong, Ezra," he whispered, his voice vibrating in my chest. "I wanted to be a crazy old man with a hole in the ground and a lot of wasted canned peaches. I would have given anything to be the punchline of a joke instead of the king of a graveyard." He reached out then, his hand hesitating in the air between us before finally coming down to rest on my shoulder. His thumb brushed against the column of my neck, a touch so light it was almost a question. I didn't pull away. I leaned into it, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm. In the silence of the bunker, with the world vaporized above us, the friction between us was the only thing that felt alive. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something more primal. It was the heat of two stars, colliding in a vacuum. "Your father was the better man," Luke said, his voice thick with a sudden, raw emotion. "He should be the one standing here, not me." "He chose you," I said, my voice trembling as I looked up at him. "He chose you to be the one who stayed." Luke's grip tightened on my shoulder, his eyes searching mine with a hunger and a sorrow that left me breathless. For a second, the distance between us vanished. I could see the flecks of gold in his irises, the small scar on his lip. The world had ended on Christmas, but in the dark of that operations room, something new and terrifying was beginning to take root. "I won't let you down, Ezra," he vowed, his face inches from mine. "I'll keep you alive, even if I have to burn the rest of this mountain to do it." He pulled his hand away abruptly, the loss of contact feeling like a physical blow. He turned back to the screens, the commander's mask sliding back into place. "Go to sleep," he said. "We have work at 6. I walked back to my room, my skin humming, the ghost of his touch still burning on my neck. The bunker was a tomb, but as I lay on my cot, listening to the heavy, rhythmic pulse of the air scrubbers, I realized I wasn't just surviving. I was waiting, and Luke Ashmore, the man who had built a world for 73 people, was the only world I had left. Chapter 3. The Weight of Air. Grief, I learned, did not move in a straight line. It did not arrive, crest, and fade like a tide. It lurked. It waited in the corners of the bunker, in the quiet hum of the air scrubbers, and the sterile tang of recycled oxygen. It hid in the moments when my hands were busy, and my mind was mercifully blank. And then, without warning, it would rise up and clamp around my throat, squeezing until the world narrowed to a pinpoint of pain. The bunker had no windows, but it had a rhythm. Lights brightened to simulate morning, a cruel, artificial gold that mimicked a sun currently choking behind a shroud of soot. They dimmed to a dusky violet, meant to coax sleep from bodies that had forgotten what night felt like. The schedule was gospel here, posted on digital screens and laminated boards. Luke Ashmore believed in routine the way some men believed in God. Routine was how you kept 73 people from unraveling into animals. I clung to it like a lifeline. Every morning, I woke before the lights fully brightened. My body still ran on surface time, on the muscle memory of a world that had known actual sunrises. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of my small, claustrophobic bunker room. It was a space designed for utility, not comfort. Minimalist steel furniture, gray wool blankets that scratched against the skin, and the constant low-frequency vibration of the mountain's core. The word temporary still hung above my door on a small, printed label. It mocked me. It suggested a transition that wasn't coming. We were all temporary now. The human race was a guest in a basement, waiting for a landlord who was never coming home. By the third week, at least, I thought it was the third week. Time loses its teeth when you never see a shadow lengthen. Luke stopped assigning someone to work alongside me, not because I had earned trust, but because I had earned efficiency. I became a ghost in the machine. I cataloged antibiotics faster than the medtechs. I learned the seed bank inventory by heart, reciting Latin names of extinct flora like a prayer. I memorized the layout of the hydroponics bay, the hydroponic cathedral, as some of the survivors called it. It was the only place that felt alive, a vast, high-ceilinged hall where walls of glowing green plants fought against the sterile gray of the bunker. Dr. Hargreave began leaving me alone with patients, trusting my calm voice and steady hands. "You don't flinch," she observed once, watching me clean a jagged wound on a man named Miller, who had panicked during a ventilation drill and cracked his head against a bulkhead. "I used to," I said, my voice sounding flat even to my own ears. She didn't ask what changed. Everyone here had a before. No one asked about them anymore. To ask about the before was to invite the ghosts to dinner, and we were already low on rations. The children were the hardest. There were 11 of them. They had been quiet at first, shock rendering them eerily compliant, like small pale dolls tucked into the corners of the communal area. But children were resilient in ways adults weren't. They adapted. They started laughing again before the rest of us remembered how to breathe without a hitch in our chests. It felt obscene. It also felt necessary. I found myself drawn to them during my off hours, sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor while they played games with scavenged decks of cards. One little girl, Mara, 6 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, asked me one evening if Christmas would ever come back. "Yes," I said, the lie slipping out before I could catch it. "It will. Even without snow?" she asked, her eyes wide and trusting. I swallowed a lump of dry grief. Especially then, Luke watched from a distance during these moments. He never hovered, never interfered. He stood at the edge of the hydroponic cathedral, looking like a weary king surveying a graveyard. He was the man who had seen the end coming and built a box to hide in, and now he had to live with the fact that he was right. The first crack in the bunker appeared on day 27. That was how Luke referred to it in the incident report. Not the first fight, not the breakdown. A crack. It started with water. Someone had taken more than their allotted ration, just a half liter, barely enough to notice on the system readouts, but enough to trigger a cascade of suspicion. In a closed system, a half liter of water isn't just a drink, it's a theft of the future. Luke called a mandatory assembly. 73 people stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the steel trusses of the common area, the air heavy with the scent of recycled sweat and rising fear. "This isn't a punishment," Luke said. His voice didn't need a microphone. It was a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "It's a correction. We survive as a unit. That means no one takes more than their share. Not today. Not ever. If the math fails, we all fail." A man near the back, a former contractor named Vance, scoffed. It was quiet, but in that silence, it sounded like a gunshot. "So speak," Luke said, his gaze locking onto Vance like a targeting laser. Vance stepped forward. He was broad-shouldered, his eyes too bright, with the kind of manic energy that comes from being trapped underground for a month. "We're underground because of your plan," Vance said, his voice trembling. "Your bunker. Your rules. And now you're telling us how much water we deserve? We aren't your soldiers, Ashmore." A murmur rippled through the crowd. It was the sound of a dry forest catching a spark. Luke didn't raise his voice. That was the terrifying part. He became still. So still, he looked like he was carved from the same granite that surrounded us. "I'm telling you how much water exists," Luke said. "Physics doesn't care about your feelings, Vance. The scrubbers don't care who you were before the sky fell. You want more water? Tell me which of these children should go thirsty to accommodate you." Vance faltered, but the bravado held. "You don't get to play king just because you were right about the world ending." Luke took a step forward. So did I. I didn't realize I'd moved until I was standing just behind his right shoulder. It was instinctive. A ghost of my father's training. Or perhaps just a desperate need to anchor myself to the only person who seemed to know which way was up. I felt Luke register me there. A subtle shift in his posture. A tightening through his back. "You want to lead?" Luke asked calmly. "Step up." Take the codes, carry 73 lives on your spine, and see how long it takes for your knees to buckle. Vance looked around, seeking support, but he found only tired, frightened faces. He backed down, muttering, but the crack had been formed. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The violet nightlights felt like bruises on the walls. I wandered toward the low hum of the operations room. Luke was there. He was always there. He sat at the main console, his broad shoulders hunched, the glow of dead satellites washing his face in shades of blue and orange. On the massive screens, the Earth was a marble of soot and fire. From this high up, you couldn't see the people dying. You just saw the chemistry of a planet being rewritten. "You're going to wear yourself into the ground," I said softly. He didn't startle. He simply exhaled, a long, ragged sound. "Someone has to stay awake, Ezra. When they think no one is watching, they start to give up." "I can't let them give up." I leaned against the cold metal of the console. "Do you ever regret it? Surviving?" He looked at me, and for the first time, the commander was gone. There was just a man. "Every day," he said. "And every day, I do it anyway, because your father told me it was worth it. He told me once that the hardest part wouldn't be the impact. It would be the silence afterward." "Is that what this is?" I asked. "The silence?" "No," Luke whispered. "This is the wait." The next day, Luke reassigned me to the operations room full-time. It was a tactical move, he claimed. I was detail-oriented, but we both knew it was something else. He wanted me where he could see me, and I wanted to be near the only person who spoke the same language of loss that I did. He taught me the systems. He stood behind me as I calibrated the atmospheric sensors, his chest nearly brushing my back. I could feel the heat of him, a living furnace in a cold world. He smelled of ozone and old coffee and something uniquely him, a scent of iron and determination. "Watch the pressure differential in Sector 4, he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "I see it," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You're steady," he said. It sounded like a confession. "I have to be." I turned to look at him, and the distance between us vanished. We were two survivors on a raft in a dark ocean. The world above was gone. The people in the rooms below were a responsibility, a burden, a math problem. But here, in the blue glow of the monitors, we were just us. He reached out, his large, calloused hand finally making contact. He didn't grab me. He just rested his hand on my shoulder, a heavy, grounding weight. His thumb brushed the line of my neck, and I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the bunker's chill. "Ezra," he said, his voice a low warning. "I know," I whispered. "This is a mistake. I'm the commander. You're Kane's daughter. I'm just me now, Luke. There isn't anyone else left to be." He closed his eyes, his grip tightening just slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to show the cracks in his own armor. "If I lose focus, people die. If you don't breathe, you'll die anyway," I countered. Before he could respond, the mountain groaned. It wasn't a crack this time. It was a shift, a deep, tectonic shudder that threw me forward. Luke caught me instinctively, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me hard against his chest. We stood there for a long moment as the alarms began to wail, a shrill, piercing cry that cut through the intimacy like a knife. "Status!" Luke barked, the commander snapping back into place instantly. I scrambled back to the monitors, my fingers flying over the keys even as my skin tingled where he had touched me. "Seismic activity, magnitude 5.4. Epicenter is... God, it's right on top of us. The shockwave from the Christmas impact is still echoing through the plates." Luke was already at the comms. "All sectors, this is Ashmore. Secure all stations. This is a secondary settling event. Remain calm." I looked at the external feed, the high-altitude camera that still functioned above the bunker. The screen was a wall of white fire. The sun wasn't rising. The Earth was simply glowing. The horizon was a distorted mess of heat haze and static. It was the white sunrise, the final thermal pulse of a world trying to find its new equilibrium. Luke stood beside me, watching the destruction of the old world on a screen the size of a window. "It's beautiful in a way," I whispered. Luke didn't look at the screen. He looked at me, his expression one of profound, terrifying clarity. "No," he said. "It's just the end. We're what comes after." He reached out and took my hand. Not as a commander, and not as a lover, but as a man clinging to a piece of driftwood in a storm. His hand was rough, scarred, and real. Outside, the mountains shook as the shockwave hit, trying to bury us deeper. Inside, we held on, two ghosts in a steel box, waiting to see if the air would hold. Chapter 4. Fault Lines. The mountain did not settle the way Luke promised it would. After the tremor, after the reassurances and clipped commands, after the children were coaxed back to sleep and the adults returned to their assigned sectors, something subtle shifted inside the bunker. It wasn't a structural failure of steel or concrete, not yet. It was a failure of the spirit. Fear, once contained by the novelty of survival, had learned how to breathe. It had become a permanent resident, sitting at the long metal tables in the hydroponic cathedral, sleeping in the cramped bunks of Sector C, and whispering in the dark corners where the cameras couldn't hear. Luke noticed it before anyone else did. He was a man built to detect cracks, whether in a bulkhead or a human soul, and because he noticed it, he changed. He started avoiding me. It wasn't overt. He didn't banish me from the operations room or revoke my clearance. Instead, he simply withdrew. The proximity that had once been unavoidable, the quiet explanations at the console, the shared watches in the blue-lit silence, the wordless understanding that passed between us during the height of the tremors, vanished. He delegated my instruction to others. When we crossed paths in the corridors, he would offer a nod, curt, professional, and agonizingly distant, and keep moving. During the daily assemblies, he addressed the group as a single, faceless mass, his gaze never once straying to where I stood. The bunker felt colder without that shared gravity between us. It felt like a planet knocked slightly off its axis, wobbling toward a sun that had already gone out. I threw myself into work to keep from drowning in the silence. Leadership, I discovered as I moved through the sectors, was mostly about listening to the things people were too afraid to say to the commander. They came to me because Luke terrified them. It wasn't that he was cruel, it was that he was too right. He carried the weight of authority like a sharpened blade, and most people were already bleeding. I was easier. I was younger, softer around the edges, and I carried a name, Mercer, that still held a ghost of the old world's hope. A woman named Eliza cornered me near the water purification station one evening. Her hands were bone-thin, shaking as she clutched her ration bottle. "They're hoarding," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the shadows. "I've seen it, Ezra. Food, extra batteries, even the warm blankets from the surplus locker." "Who?" I asked, leaning in. She hesitated, her lip trembling. "Does it matter? It starts with one person taking an extra bite, and it ends with us tearing each other apart for the last scrap. You have to tell him. You have to tell Ashmore." "He knows," I said, though I wasn't sure if he did. Luke was focused on the mountain. He was focused on the physics of staying alive. I wasn't sure if he still understood the chemistry of the people. Later that night, a fight broke out in Sector C. It wasn't about water or food. It was about space. Two men and a woman were shouting, their voices echoing like thunder through the narrow corridors. By the time I arrived, Luke was already there. He moved with a military efficiency that was almost frightening to behold, separating the combatants with a strength that looked effortless. I knelt beside the woman, whose lip was split and bleeding. "Easy," I murmured, dabbing at the blood with a sterile wipe from my kit. "You're safe," she laughed, a jagged, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "Safe? Safe underground while the world burns?" "We're in a tomb, Mercer. We're just waiting for the door to rust shut." Her words stuck with me like a burr. "Safe underground" had begun to sound like an accusation. Luke called another assembly the following morning. The mood was different this time, sharper, more brittle. There was no preamble about hope or the resilience of the human spirit. Luke stood on the raised platform, the blue light of the monitors behind him, making him look like a shadow cast against a wall of fire. "Structural readings indicate ongoing instability in the upper rock layers," he announced. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "It is minor, but persistent. To ensure the integrity of the life support systems, we are adjusting movement protocols. Access to sectors D and E will be restricted to essential personnel only. Ration cycles will be moved to an 8-hour rotation to minimize foot traffic near the primary supports." The murmurs came faster this time, a low growl of dissent. "You said the bunker was stable," a man shouted from the back. "It is," Luke replied. "Then why are we cutting back? Why are we being locked in like animals?" "Because survival isn't static," Luke said, his voice hardening. "It adapts. If we don't adapt to the mountain will crush us." A man named Vance, the same one who had challenged Luke weeks ago, stepped forward. "With respect, sir, we deserve a say in how we live out the rest of our days." "We aren't your infantry." Luke cut him off before he could finish. "This isn't a democracy, Vance. It's a life support system. And on this system, I am the operator." The silence that followed was so thick, it felt like it would suffocate us all. I felt the social contract of the bunker crack right then and there. After the assembly dispersed, I followed Luke into the narrow operations corridor. My footsteps echoed too loudly, a frantic rhythm against his steady stride. "Luke, stop." He didn't slow down. "I have a pressurized seal to check in Sector B, Ezra." "You can't talk to them like that," I said, grabbing his arm. He stopped abruptly, turning to face me. The distance he had tried to maintain evaporated in an instant. Up close, I could see the cost of his silence. His eyes were bloodshot, deep hollows of exhaustion carved beneath them. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the sky fell. "I can," he said quietly. "And I will, because if I don't, they'll start asking questions I can't answer. They'll start looking for hope, where there is only physics. They're scared, Luke. They need a leader, not a warden." "So am I," he shot back, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "That's the difference between us, Ezra. I don't get the luxury of showing it. I don't get the luxury of being human because 73 people need me to be a machine. You don't get the luxury of ignoring them either," I said, my voice rising. "If you push them too hard, if you treat them like components in a machine, they'll break. And when they break, they'll tear this place apart before the mountain even gets a chance." For a moment, I thought he might snap. I saw the flash of anger in his eyes, the raw, military instinct to crush dissent. But then, it flickered and died, replaced by something that looked horribly like grief. "You think I don't know that?" he said. "Every crack in this rock, every whisper of rebellion, every ounce of water that goes missing. It's on me. If this fails, it's not just a project that failed. It's the end of everything Kane Mercer worked for. It's the end of the world, twice over. And if you lose your humanity to save us," I said, stepping closer, "what's left to save?" The air between us was thick, charged with the memory of the tremor and the heat of his hand on my shoulder. "This is why I tried to put distance between us," he said finally, his voice ragged. "Because I challenge you? Because you matter," he said, the words sounding like a confession he hated. "And that compromises me. Every time I make a decision about oxygen levels or structural reinforcement, I'm not thinking about 73 people anymore. I'm thinking about you. And I can't afford that. I can't afford to be afraid of losing one person when I'm supposed to be saving a species." The honesty of it stole my breath. I had spent so much time feeling abandoned by his silence that I hadn't realized it was a fortress he had built to protect himself from the very thing he felt for me. "You don't get to decide that alone," I replied, my voice trembling. His jaw tightened. "I do if it keeps you safe." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Safe? You're the one who told me there is no safety. You don't get to protect me from myself, Luke. My father didn't raise me to be a component you tuck away in a corner." "I know what he raised you to be," Luke said, stepping into my space. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating off him. "That's the problem." The crisis came 3 days later, proving that the mountain didn't care about our arguments or our unspoken desires. It began with a scream that tore through the recycled air of the mid-levels. Then came the alarms. Not the rhythmic, pulsing warnings of a drill, but the frantic, high-pitched shrieks of a system in total failure. "Atmospheric breach in Sector D," the automated voice announced, calm and terrifying. "Oxygen loss detected, sealing bulkheads in 60 seconds. Sector D, the living quarters for 12 people, including Mara, the little girl who still believed in Christmas." Luke was moving before the first sentence finished. I didn't wait for an order. I ran for the medbay, grabbing emergency oxygen canisters and trauma kits. When I reached the bulkhead of Sector D, Luke was already there, his face set in a grim mask of determination. "The seal failed," he said, his hands flying over the manual override panel. "A microfracture in the rock wall. The tremor from 3 days ago must have weakened the secondary casing." "There are people in there," I said, pulling on an emergency respirator. "I know." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "Suit up. But if I tell you to leave, you leave. No arguments." "I'm coming with you," I said, snapping my mask into place. "No, Ezra. It's too unstable. You need someone to stabilize the injured while you patch the breach," I snapped, my voice muffled by the mask. "I was raised by Kane Mercer. I'm not staying behind the door." Our eyes locked for a heartbeat, a silent battle of wills that he eventually lost. He nodded once. "Stay behind me. If the pressure drops too fast, the door will auto-lock. We have 10 minutes tops." We entered Sector D. It was a nightmare of hissing air and flickering emergency lights. The breach was visible, a jagged black line in the far wall where the mountain had finally forced its way in. Dust and pulverized rock filled the air, making it impossible to see more than a few feet. "Luke!" a voice cried out. It was Vance. He was pinned under a collapsed storage rack, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Near him, 2 of the children were huddled under a metal table, their faces pale with terror as they clutched their own respirators. "Get the kids out!" Luke shouted over the roar of escaping air. He moved toward the breach, wielding a high-pressure foam sealant like a weapon. I dove for the children, ushering them toward the bulkhead. "Go! Run to the common area. Don't look back." I turned back for Vance. He was gasping, his eyes wide with the realization that he was about to die in the very room he had complained about. "I've got you," I said, Bracing my shoulder against the rack, I strained, the metal groaning as I tried to lift it. "It's no use," Vance wheezed. "The wall, it's coming down." "Shut up and pull," I hissed. Suddenly, a massive weight joined mine. Luke was there, his face strained, his muscles bulging as he heaved the rack upward. "Now, Ezra, pull him out." I dragged Vance clear just as the rack collapsed back down. Luke didn't waste a second. He grabbed the sealant and began spraying the crack in the wall, the white foam hardening instantly against the freezing rock. But the mountain wasn't done. A secondary tremor hit, sharp and violent. The floor buckled beneath us. A slab of concrete fell from the ceiling, slamming into the electronic control panel for the bulkhead door. The sparks were the only warning we had. With a heavy, final thud, the emergency door slammed shut. The lockdown was total. We were trapped in the failing sector. Luke, myself, and a badly injured Vance. Luke swore under his breath, a string of words I'd never heard him use. He ran to the door, tearing the cover off the manual release. "It's fused," he said, his voice tight. The surge melted the relays. "Atmospheric levels?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Stabilizing but low," he replied, checking his wrist unit. "The sealant is holding for now, but we're on a closed loop with no scrubbers. We have maybe 2 hours of breathable air left in this room. We need to get Vance's leg set," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "He's going into shock." We worked in the dim red glow of the emergency lights. The adrenaline that had carried us through the breach began to fade, replaced by a cold, heavy reality. I worked on Vance, my hands steady, despite the fact that every breath felt like it was getting harder to take. Luke assisted me, his movements precise and silent. After an hour, Vance drifted into a restless, pain-med-induced sleep. The room grew quiet, save for the faint hiss of the oxygen canisters. "I shouldn't have let you come in here," Luke said. He was sitting against the wall, his head tilted back against the cold steel. "I'm glad you did," I said, sitting beside him. "I'd rather be in here with you than out there wondering if you were dead." He looked at me then. In the red light, he looked like a ghost. "Why?" "Because you're the only thing that makes sense in this place, Luke. The rules, the routine, the bunker, it's all just a box. You're the person who makes the box worth staying in." He reached out, his hand finding mine in the dark. His grip was tight, desperate. "I can't lose you, Ezra. I've lost the world. I've lost my mentor. I've lost my soul, to this mountain. I can't lose you too." "You won't," I whispered. "I know it's wrong," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I know the timing is a disaster. I know I'm twice your age, and I'm supposed to be the man who has all the answers. But when that door shut, all I could think about was that I hadn't told you." "Then tell me now," I said. The air was getting thin. My head felt light, the world narrowing down to the heat of his hand and the sound of his breathing. "I love you," he said. The words were simple, stripped of rank and duty. They were the most dangerous things ever spoken in this bunker. "I think I've loved you since the moment you stepped out of that truck and looked at me like I was the one who had failed you." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "You didn't fail me, Luke. You saved me." "I saved your body," he corrected. "I don't know if I can save the rest." "Then just hold me," I said. "For as long as the air lasts." He pulled me into his arms, his chest a solid, steady wall against the chaos of the world. In the darkness of Sector D, trapped in a tomb within a tomb, the distance between us finally, irrevocably collapsed. The lights flickered. A muffled boom echoed through the door, the sound of the rescue crew using a thermal lance to cut through the fused bulkhead. The moment shattered, but the truth remained. When the door finally gave way 2 hours later, and the fresh, scrubbed air of the main bunker rushed in to meet us, Luke was the first one through. He was the commander again, shouting orders, directing the medics, reporting to the bridge. But as they wheeled Vance away on a stretcher, Luke paused. He looked back at me, just for a second. The distance was back, the professional mask was in place, but his eyes were different. The mountain had cracked. So had we. And beneath the steel and stone, beneath the rules and the fear and the duty, something dangerous and undeniable was beginning to rise. We were no longer just survivors. We were something far more complicated. We were a secret. As I walked back to my quarters, the word temporary above my door seemed to glow in the violet light. I realized then that nothing was temporary anymore. Not the bunker, not the grief, and certainly not the weight of the air between Luke and me. We were the last of a species, and we had just found the one thing more terrifying than the end of the world, something to lose. The transition from survival to living was not a clean break. It was a slow, agonizing thrum of friction. As the bunker's mechanical heart beat on, the walls seemed to shrink, drawing the 73 souls inside closer until every breath felt shared. Chapter 5. What Survives? After the breach, the bunker stopped pretending. The illusion that this place was simply a shelter, temporary, neutral, untouched by the collapse of the world above, fell apart. The mountain had reminded us that even stone could fracture, and the people followed suit. Luke tightened protocols, his voice becoming a series of clipped commands that echoed through the steel corridors like hammer blows. I softened them. I spent my hours in the sectors he avoided, touching shoulders, listening to the jagged rhythms of their grief, and translating his rigidity into something they could swallow. Together, without ever naming it, we became a balance. The community noticed. They saw the way Luke's eyes instinctively sought mine during heated assemblies, looking for a silent anchor before he anchored the rest of them. They noticed the way my hand would brush his arm in the hallway, a fleeting electric contact that lingered in the air long after we parted. Whispers followed, but they weren't cruel. They were the hushed, desperate observations of people looking for a sign that beauty hadn't died with the trees. But as the social friction eased, the internal friction between us became unbearable. Luke pulled away physically. He stopped walking me to my quarters. He stopped looking at me across the operations room. Every line he drew was deliberate, painful, and unmistakable. I found him one night in the hydroponic cathedral. The air was thick and humid, smelling of damp earth and life. The violet grow lights bathed his rugged features in a surreal, bruised glow. He was leaning over a nutrient tank, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the powerful scarred cords of his forearms. "You're punishing yourself," I said, my voice echoing in the vast space. He didn't look up, but I saw the muscles in his back go taut. "I'm protecting you, Ezra. From what? Judgment? Or the fact that you want me as much as I want you?" He exhaled a long, ragged breath and finally turned. The heat between us was instantaneous, a physical force that made the humid air feel heavy. "I don't get to want things," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly low. "I am the keeper of this grave. I took a vow to Cain to keep you safe, not to take your youth for my own comfort." I stepped into his space, my boots clicking on the metal grating. The scent of him, salt, iron, and old coffee swirled around me. "I am not a prize to be protected, Luke. I am a woman who has lost everything except the man standing in front of her." I reached out, my fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. His skin was rough, a stark contrast to the trembling heat of my touch. He closed his eyes, a pained sound vibrating in his chest, and for a moment, he leaned into my hand. The vulnerability in that gesture was more intimate than any word. "You're 21, he whispered, his eyes snapping open, dark with a hunger he was trying to starve. "The world ended. Trauma bonds feel like love when there's nothing else to hold on to. Is that what this is to you? A bond of trauma?" I moved closer, my chest nearly brushing his. I could feel the thudding of his heart, frantic and heavy. "Because when you held me in Sector D, when the air was running out, that didn't feel like trauma. It felt like the only real thing I've ever known." He gripped my wrists, his hands large and calloused, pinning me with a gaze that burned. "If I start, Ezra, if I let myself touch you the way I want to, I won't be able to stop. I won't be able to be the commander they need. I'll just be a man. And a man is weak." "Then be weak with me," I breathed. He didn't move, but the air between us crackled with a desperate, forbidden sensuality. He let go of my wrists, his fingers lingering on my skin, before he turned and vanished into the shadows of the ferns. I stayed there, shaking, surrounded by the green glow of a world that refused to die, and realized that his resistance was the greatest act of love he knew how to give. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. Dr. Hargreave called a full meeting. The news was a thunderclap. The atmosphere was stabilizing. Surface expeditions were possible within 2 years. Hope, volatile and terrifying, flooded the room. That night, the weight finally broke him. I found him in the operations room, but the monitors were dark. He was slumped in his chair, head in his hands. "I can't carry them anymore," he said, his voice hoarse. "They want a map to a world that doesn't exist yet." I walked behind him, my hands resting on his broad shoulders. I could feel the knots of tension, the literal burden of 70 lives etched into his muscles. I began to knead the tension, my thumbs pressing into the heat of his neck. He groaned, his head falling back against my stomach. "You were never meant to be a god, Luke," I whispered, leaning down so my lips brushed his ear. "Just an anchor." He turned in the chair, pulling me between his knees. His hands found my waist, drawing me flush against him. The professional mask was gone, shattered by the prospect of a future he hadn't prepared for. "I don't know how to be both," he admitted, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know how to want a life with you and still be the one to send people into the ash." "Then don't ask for permission," I said. I ran my fingers through his hair, pulling him closer until our breaths mingled. "Ask me, Ezra," he groaned, his hands sliding up my back, pressing me into the hard planes of his body. The contact was electric. a release of months of repressed longing. Ask me, Luke. He pulled me down, his mouth finally finding mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It tasted of desperation, of salt, and of a hunger that had been fueled by the end of the world. His tongue was a hot intrusion, demanding and possessive, and I met him with an equal ferocity, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer as if I could crawl inside his very skin. He broke away, gasping, his forehead pressed against mine. "I love you," he whispered, the words sounding like a surrender. "God help me, I love you. I've been waiting for you to catch up," I whispered back, my heart finally finding its rhythm in the dark. Chapter 6. When the dust settles. 2 years later, the world breathed again. It wasn't the lush, vibrant world of my childhood, but a bruised, resilient thing. The sky was a pale, dusty lavender, and the land was a scarred vista of charcoal and gray, but the green was winning. Small, stubborn shoots of life pushed through the ash, refusing to stay buried. Neither did we. The first surface settlement was a cluster of modular units near the bunker's main vent. We called it Kane's Landing. 70 people had gone into the mountain, 68 came out. We carried the 2 we lost in the names of our streets and the stories we told the children. Luke oversaw the construction, but he was a different man now. The grim warden had been replaced by a builder. He laughed. A deep, resonant sound that still made my stomach flip. He slept beside me in a bed that wasn't made of steel, in a room that had a window made of reinforced glass. Our relationship unfolded with the same deliberate care as the crops in our greenhouses. There was no more secrecy. When we walked through the settlement, his hand stayed firmly in mine. He didn't hide the way he looked at me, with a devastating, quiet pride that told everyone exactly who I was to him. The sensuality that had been born in the dark of the bunker blossomed in the light. In the quiet hours of the morning, before the settlement stirred, we would lie in the pale light of the lavender dawn. He would trace the lines of my body with a reverence that made me feel like the most precious thing left on earth. "You're thinking about him," Luke murmured one evening. We were standing on the ridge, watching the sun dip toward a horizon that was no longer on fire. "I'm thinking about how much he would have loved the smell of the wind," I said, leaning back against him. He wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting on the crown of my head. The heat of him was my constant, my North Star. "He knew," Luke said softly. "Kane knew that even if the world ended, something would have to grow back. He just didn't tell me it would be this beautiful." He turned me in his arms, his eyes dark with that familiar, simmering heat. He ran a thumb over my lower lip, pulling it down slightly. "I used to think I was saving a species, Ezra, but I was just waiting for you to save me." He kissed me then, a slow, deep lingering that tasted of the sea salt air and the promise of tomorrow. It wasn't the desperate kiss of a dying world anymore. It was the steady, burning flame of a new one. Below us, the lights of the settlement flickered on. Children who had been born in the dark ran through the ash-dusted grass, their laughter rising like sparks. We had survived the fire, the pressure, and the silence. We had found that love wasn't just a trauma bond, or a biological necessity. It was the choice to stay when the walls were closing in, and the courage to walk out when the doors finally opened. The world hadn't ended. It had changed, and we, standing on the edge of a new beginning, were finally home. If you enjoyed this journey through the end of the world and the resilience of the human heart, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more epic stories and cinematic adventures. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. See you in the next wasteland.